Okay, this is the interesting bit that we don't know when people actually join.
It's true.
I'll just leave it for a second or two, and just in the hope that people are still joining us.
Over 20 people.
I'm glad you can hear us, David. Okay, I'm just going to start speaking because just to get us going. Welcome everyone, and welcome to this new platform, which I think we're all starting to try and get used to. But yes, welcome to the first of the 2022 Café Scientifiques. It's nice to be back and to get ready to hear some interesting talks over the next few months. Just as an introduction, to those of you that might be joining us for the first time, welcome. Those of you that are coming back, welcome, 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 and thanks for coming back. And yeah, so just a bit of an overview of how this evening's going to run. We're going to have a talk by our invited speaker, who will introduce in a little while. I'm out of practice with all of this. And then we'll have a bit of a break after a talk of about 40 minutes. And then we will get back, and that's when we'll have a question and answer session. Now, with this platform, those of you that have already found the chat bit, well done. But there's also an ask a question option that you can click on that at the bottom of the screen and type in your question, and we will use those as part of the discussion that will take place. The way that will work is, for those of you that haven't been around while we've been online, is pretty much I'll read out your questions and we'll have a discussion round about them. Okay, so I think without further ado, I don't need to show you where the bar is. I don't need to show you where the toilets are or the exit. Hopefully you know where that is in your own house. So without further ado, I will hand you over to Emily, who's going to be talking all about the genetics of red squirrels in the south of England.
Thanks, Sharon.
Thanks very much.
Let me share my screen. Tack. Good. Can you see the slide? Yes. Are you able to see the slide? I can't hear you.
Start sharing the screen.
Sorry, pardon?
I forgot you can't see me once you start sharing the screen.
No, yes, exactly. Okay, cool. But yeah, it looks like people were saying it. Yeah, because I can't see. So like the issue is I can't see the question and I can't see the people. So if people don't talk to me, I don't know what's happening.
So okay. we can't see the screen at the moment, but we could a minute ago.
Okay, cool. Perfect. Here we go. So that should be fine then.
Yes, that's fine.
Good. Cheers. Let's hide this. Hi, so welcome everyone. So today I'm going to talk to you about a project we start 4 or 5 years ago. It's kind of like a young project, so to say. And basically, I'm looking at the red squirrels in the south of England, and I am looking at them in kind of like with genetic tools. I'm not an ecologist at all. So basically, what I'm doing is kind of like try to see how can genetics help the conservation of like red squirrels here. I just wanted to say, like a little bit about me. So I'm an evolutionary biologist by training. I did my PhD in north of Germany here in an institute, called Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Biology. And basically what I did study those like furry thing, the house mouse. So the house mouse are basically everywhere, and the house mouse are a plague. So not sure if you guys have seen the news, but this year, for example, Australia had some plague of house mouse. And the thing which always, like sort of like fascinate me is how such a small rodents, it's like only 20 grams or so, can go and invite, like the entire world and just also adapt to all these different type of environments. So for my PhD, I was looking mostly at the Kerguelen archipelago. So let me put the pointer here. So sort of like down here and looking at how those little mice adapt to a different environment. And I'm kind of like saying this because when you do conservation genetics, you kind of like use the same tools that you have as an evolutionary biologist, but you use them in order to infer conservation. So it's kind of like background does help, like when you want to do research in conservation genetics, basically. But for today, I'm not going to talk about the cutie mice. I'm going to talk about the red squirrels. So the Eurasian red squirrel, Squirrels vulgaris. And it's really funny because I'm French and I did live in Germany for a bit. So for me, for a very long time, red squirrels were everywhere until one day. And I remember I was in Nottingham going to that park and I saw all those like cutie gray squirrels. And I always find them, like sort of like very interesting, so to say. It was just before I kind of like learned that the gray squirrel were invasive species. But if we want to look at the Eurasian red squirrels, let's look at the distributions first. So geographical range of like red squirrels, you can find them, like from Ireland around here to Russia. If you look at the IUCN red list, the red squirrels are not doing too bad. So the population is decreasing, which is not great, but they are of least concern throughout their range. Obviously, in the UK, the situation is totally different. And that situation started, like sort of like really earlier on. So the red squirrel used to be very common in the British Isles, but in the 17th and 18th century, they became almost absent because the people were clearing woodlands. And the really, like nice things about it, I mean, in a way, it's kind of like British people really loved their red squirrels, even at the time. So they were started to do translocation from one part of the islands to the other parts in order to conserve the species. And we also know that they also translated the squirrel, not only, like within locations in the UK, but also from Europe to the UK. So for example, there is, we know that squirrel has been introduced from Sweden to the UK, for example. But obviously, the main problem with for the red squirrels are the gray squirrels. And I'm just going to show you, like two maps here. So this is the distribution of red and gray squirrels in 1945. The red squirrels are in red on the map. The gray squirrels are in gray, and in orange, it's when you have, like both squirrels. So you could see that in 1945, red squirrels were pretty much all around, like in Scotland, in Ireland, Wales, Cornwall, quite a bit of England. Gray was starting to be in the center here, but the picture totally dramatically changed, because now in 2010, you can see that red squirrels are almost absent from England, except, like here where we are, and also, like in the north of England. We still have quite a few in Scotland and in Ireland, but basically the population, the distribution of red squirrels dramatically decreased in the UK. And this is done to this little guy here, the grey squirrels. It was introduced in the 19th century. Is a direct competitor of red squirrels. So you use the same food resources, but that is not the main issue. The main issue is that little guy here is a carrier of that virus here, the squirrel pox virus, and that is actually the virus who do kill the red squirrels. And the problem with the grey squirrel, sorry, it's not just a UK problem. So we know that grey squirrels are in the UK, but they also find them in Italy now. So there is several, so you can see on the map, there is several, population of grey squirrels in Italy. And obviously that is very problematic, because if those grey squirrels expand, that means that they could potentially go and outcompete the grey squirrel throughout their range. There is quite a lot of people now working in Italy, because we know what happens in the UK. So quite a lot of people in Italy are actually trying to make sure that the grey squirrels don't survive, or don't the population don't increase that much. Okay, so that's a bit for the red squirrels in general, but where can we find them in the south of England? And I'm mostly going to talk about the population we have around here. So we have the Isle of Wight. The Isle of Wight, you have around 3,000 individuals, more or less, and we also have some other population on Poole Harbour. So if we have a closer look, we have a population on Bronzy, around 300 individuals. And we also have two small islands, so Furzy Islands and Green Island, who have, a tiny populations of red squirrels. So Furzy around 30 individuals and Green Island around 15 individuals. So what do we want to do? So basically, as a conservation geneticist, what we try to do is we want to avoid that our populations to go to the extinction vortex. So this is the diagram I have here. The main issue when you think about islands populations, so for example, Bronzy Island, is they are small populations. And when a population is small, several things can happen to it. One of them could be inbreeding. And if we think about inbreeding is the breeding of closely related people or animal, especially over many generations. So one of a very good example of inbreeding was the Habsburg. So it was a royal family in Spain. And if you look at the genealogy, around here, you could see that they were marrying and having children with their very close relatives. So for example, here, Philip II of Spain, he did marry his niece, Anne of Austria, and they got, a child. That child did marry his second cousin, Margarita of Australia. They got, two descendants, Philip IV of Spain, who did, marry his niece again, and so on and so forth. And basically, the Habsburg family become very famous because of their jaw. It's actually called the Habsburg jaw here. It's mandibular prognathis. And that jaw is believed to be due to this kind of all this inbreeding. And that was kind of this type of jaw you will only see in the Habsburg family. So obviously this is in human population, but what about, in the wild? And a very nice example of inbreeding in the wild is the Florida panther here. So you can see one of them down there. So the Florida panther, they live in Florida, hence their name. But they had a very small population. So the population was almost, I think it went down to 6 individuals over 2 generations. So really, really tiny populations, a lot of inbreeding. Mostly the problem of that species was illegal hunting and also, roadkills. But basically what that meant for the animals, nowadays they have high prevalence of infectious disease. They have morphological abnormalities. So if you look at the tail here, this is what they call, a king tail, and this is due to inbreeding. but they also have cardiac defect or poor semen quality. And if you have poor semen quality, you can't reproduce, like that well. Therefore, like it's even more complicated for the populations to, like grow bigger. So this is for inbreeding. And the other thing is the random genetic drift here. So random genetic drift is the change in gene frequency in a population from generation to generations, which occur by chance. It's kind of like throwing a coin in the air. So for our children, we always give, like one of our gene, and our partner will give the other gene. And which gene we give, we have 2 genes, which gene we give to our children is just totally random. So just a little diagram to show that. So this is with cheetahs. So we only have 4 cheetahs here. So we got 2 couples. So here, that cheetah's got 2 genes. So a gene A1 and a gene A2. That other one's got, again, 2 genes, a gene A1 and a gene A2. They reproduced, they got 3 offspring. And if you look at the 3 offspring, this one's got A1 from the father, A1 from the mom. This one's got A1 from the father, A2 from the mom. This one's got A1 from the father, and A2 from the mom. So if we look at the genes here, we've got exactly the same gene as in their parents. So we've got A1 and we've got A2. And here we have another couple. These guys here is A3, A1. She is A2, A1. They only have 1 offspring, which is A1, A1. So he received the A1 from his father and the A1 from the mom. The thing is just randomly, the gene A3 is lost in the populations. And the smaller your population is, the more likely you are to lose some gene just because of chance. So basically, that's kind of like this is basically what's happened. So small populations, we got a lot of like inbreeding. We're going to have some genetic drift, so some loss of allele over generation. So we have less genetic variability, which means that our individual are less fit, so they can't reproduce that well. You will have a higher mortality, and your population is going to get smaller. And basically, this is what we study, and this is what we want to avoid. So this is kind of like the theory. What about our red squirrels? So I looked at 3 populations, one population on the Isle of Wight, Bronzy Island, and Furzy Island. We didn't have any samples from Green Island to start with. So the first thing is I'm a geneticist. So basically what I want to do, I want to find DNA. And there is 2 sources of DNA in the cell. There is the nuclear genome, and this is where, like traditionally, this is where most of our genome is actually contained in chromosomes, like sort of like around here. But we also have some little genome within the mitochondria, so which is called, like mitochondrial DNA. And basically, when we start this project, we didn't start by looking at the nuclear genome. We start to look at the mitochondrial genome, sort of like around here. So these are the samples we had. We had 21 samples from Bronzy. We've got 8 samples from Furzy Islands. And we had 30 samples from the Isle of Wight. And we look at the sequences from the mitochondrial genome. And basically, we had this nice little network down there. So it's really easy to read. So each circle does represent, like a sequence. So basically, that sequence here is different from that sequence here. And the dash here represents the number of like mutations. So if I look at that sequences, I know that there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 mutations between that sequence here and that sequence here. The size of the circles only represent the number of like samples. So for example, here I only got 1 individual who got that particular sequences. But if I look at sort of like around here, I've got 10 individuals who got the same sequences. And the colors represent the different populations. So red is for bronzy, yellow is fuzzy, and this kind of like purple pink-ish is the Isle of Wight. So one of like the things you first see, so if we look at bronzy and fuzzy, you can see that they got exactly the same sequence. So we have two different sequences, but both of them are shared between islands, which means that squirrels might be able to move between bronzy and fuzzy islands. And we know that it's possible because the islands are really close to one another, and we know that squirrels can swim. So that was, still quite interesting there. And the Isle of Wight as well. So if you look, like around here, that sequences. So you can see quite a lot of like individual from bronzy has it, fuzzy, but also the Isle of Wight. And that kind of like also tells you that the Isle of Wight squirrels, they are genetically closely related to bronzy and fuzzy islands. Okay. But the thing which is nice when you study the mitochondrial DNA, it's actually a lot of like scientists are studying the mitochondrial DNA. So I could actually compare my samples to a European data set, basically. And this is what I did, spend quite a lot of like time trying to find all the sequences. So we find more than 1,000 samples from 19 different countries. And we compare our islands, so Isle of Wight, bronzy, and fuzzy, to those samples. And what we see was actually quite nice. So first of all, we find that we had lower genetic diversity on our islands, which, it was sort of like expected because you always have lower genetic diversity on islands when compared to mainland populations. But also what we find that our populations, so the Isle of Wight, bronzy, and fuzzy, were kind of like genetically unique. So we could not find them anywhere else. Not in Europe, and also, like within Europe, also like in the UK. So that was kind of like our first study. And that brings, that study did brought, like quite a lot of like question. So we wanted to go, like a little bit deeper to the understanding of the genetic of those populations. So now instead of like looking at the mitochondrial genome, we looked at the nuclear genomes. And basically this is what we got. So we had 5 populations, Baden-Württemberg and Bavaria, just 2 Bundesland in Germany. And this is kind of like the main continental population that I had to compare my island's population to. I had some sample from the Isle of Wight, from Bronzy Island. At that point, we didn't have any more sample from fuzzy, so we could actually not put fuzzy in that study. And we also had some samples on the Isle of Arran in Scotland. So this is what we had, 5 populations and 40 nuclear markers. So the first thing we did, it's kind of like some genetic analysis, and we tried to find out, which population is closely related to. And if you look at that little diagram here, so here you have, in purple, you have Bavaria, in green, you have Baden-Württemberg. So what you can see here is my 2 German population nicely clustered together, which is again expected because excuse me, those populations are adjacent to one another. So if we look at the map down here, Baden-Württemberg is here and Bavaria is just, like around here. So both populations cluster nicely together. Arran in Scotland is a little bit further away, so that it's what we expect as well. And we can see that again, the Isle of Wight and Bronzy Islands are genetically similar. Okay. The other thing we could see is the genetic diversity on both German population were higher than on the islands, sort of like as well. The thing which was really great with this data set is we didn't have a lot of like bronzy samples. I think we have around like 10 or so, but we had around hundreds Isle of Wight samples, which means that actually we can have a very detailed look about what is happening on the Isle of Wight. And this is basically what we did. So this is a map of the Isle of Wight. And we look at the population structure of the Isle of Wight red squirrels. So each circle here represents one squirrel. So it's one individual that we have, all of like these little pie charts. And the different colors corresponds to genetically different populations. So if you look at the Isle of Wight, obviously you can clearly see two different genetic populations. So we had this very light green, which are on that side of the island, and we also have this like dark green population here on the other part of the island. And that does ring some alarm bell, because if you look at something like that, you might think that actually the populations might not be able to migrate, like freely from, like the west to the east of the island, and that could potentially be a problem for the squirrels down there. But the other things that we have here, you can see, like in the middle, we barely have any samples. So I think we would need to get more samples here to actually confirm sort of like our results. But this is where we are. So basically, when we look at all the data we have, we find that the Isle of Wight, Bronzy, and Fuzzy Island are genetically similar and unique when we compare to a European data set. We find low genetic diversity on the Isle of Wight and on Bronzy Islands when we compare to continental populations. But the very good thing, though, is when we look at the genetic data, at the moment, we can't find any sign of inbreeding on the Isle of Wight. So even though there is low genetic diversity, or it's lower than in the continental population, it's still fine. There is no inbreeding happening on the Isle of Wight. So obviously, like things were going quite well. We were publishing our papers, and like for everybody else, like sort of like COVID happens. And it's kind of like really funny, because I was looking at my slides when I wanted to prepare that talk, and basically nothing really much happened in the lab since 2 years. So, I mean, I guess it's the same for everyone. But we are back in the lab now, so we are starting again. And what happened is this autumn, we did receive 25 samples from the south of the islands that one of our collaborators actually sort of like gave us. And this is what we're doing literally at the moment in the lab. We're DNA extracting, like all those samples, and we're going to genotype them. So we're going to have a better idea about what's happening on the Isle of Wight. And also something which happened last year, the university did both one of like those sequencer here. So this one is called a MySeq, but basically what the sequencer allow you to do, they allow you to go from genetics. So you remember when I did all my study, we had 14 sort of like genetic markers to genomics. So instead of like looking at my 14 markers, I can look at squirrels' genomes. So, like we have way more possibilities now. And also what's happened during, like one of like the project which is on at the moment in the UK, it's called the Darwin Tree of Life. And that project, it's amazing, because they're actually going to sequence all 17,000 species from the British Isles, so quite a lot of like species, and obviously the red squirrel is one of them. So now not only we get like the genomes the sequencer available at the university, but the squirrel genome is also available. So like we have way more possibilities to do some study, and this is the future plan. And hopefully we're hoping that we will be able to start like in September, finger crossed. And we're going to look at the population genomics of red squirrels. So the first thing we're going to look at, we're going to investigate the population viability. And you do this by looking at the genetic data, but also looking at the ecology. So it's going to be, you know, like, when do the squirrel reproduce? How many offspring do they have? Do people, you know, like, feed them? Because normally if you feed, you know, like, squirrels, they might be able to reproduce, you know, like, earlier, and they might be able to reproduce more, and so on and so forth. And once you have all these parameters, you just like put them in sort of like a model, and that model will just like tell you how likely or unlikely is your populations to go extinct. So that's going to be, you know, like, quite important to know. And also, we're going to look at inbreeding on the Isle of Wight. So I think at the moment, when we look at inbreeding, we only had, you know, like 14 genetic markers. And because now we got all those sequencer, we're going to increase our number of markers, like from 14 to 20,000. And that way, we're going to be able to have, you know, like or look at inbreeding in a very finely sort of like detail. Obviously, we don't have any result yet. I mean, the project didn't start yet. But, you know, if Sharon and Adam, I'm happy to have me back. Can come back in a couple of years to present, you know, like sort of like those results. I mean, just some acknowledgements, because I'm the one talking, but there is quite a lot of like people who actually work on that project. The first person is Kathy Holder. So she is the red squirrels ecologist in Bournemouth University. She has worked on squirrels, you know, like for many years now. And she is the one who, you know, like, who introduced me to the squirrel words, so to say. Helen Butler is part of the White Squirrel Project. She is leading the White Squirrel Project. And so she's on the Isle of Wight, and she has been studying squirrels for like 30 years. And she has been essential. I mean, she's the person who gives us, you know, like, all the samples we have at the moment in the lab. And also Roger Herbert. So Roger Herbert is he's a marine ecologist, but sorry, he's living on the Isle of Wight, and he's being essentials. You know, like, he has been always very keen on helping with the Red Squirrel project, and, you know, like, putting us in contact with everyone on the island. And also all my list of like collaborators, you know, who did help, you know, like, all around those years. Cool. Well, thank you for your attention. Do you have any questions? I think I should stop sharing my screen now. Sorry, I went a bit fast, I think.
That's okay. It's not a problem at all. Hopefully in the next part of this evening, we can discuss anyway. So it gives us plenty of time for questions. So I think what we will do is just have a quick break for 5 minutes or so, just so that you can have a bit of a breather and have a drink, and for everybody else to go and get a drink. And it gives you a chance to put your questions into the ask a question section and look at what other people are asking, and perhaps it's something that you're thinking about, so you can influence the order of the questions and all sorts of things like that. And we will be back with you in 5 minutes time. Okay, so we'll see you in 5 minutes. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Are you ready for the questions, Emily? I'm going to start off with there's a variety of sort of topics that the questions are on. I'm going to start off with one that's related to your study, which is probably a good place to start. Why are you investigating the Isle of Wight population but not Brownsea?
So it's not because I don't want to investigate Brownsea. It's mostly because Helen was, you know, like, did give us all those samples. We are also now talking to people on Brownsea Island, and I'm really hoping that actually quite soon we're going to be able to have a closer look at Brownsea. And, you know, like, and hopefully Brownsea, Fursey, and Green Island. So this is what we're hoping for. So it's not because I didn't want it to have a look at them. It's mostly because, you know, like, samples were not available when we started the work.
I think you've got the whole thing of the actual size of the population as well, haven't you? And
Yes, well, I think there is, and it's also because so Helen, the woman on the Isle of Wight, she was very keen for us to look, like really closer to the Isle of Wight to see what was happening there because she has been working on it for a very long time. Yes, it's the bigger populations as well, but yes, I'm really hoping. I'm hopefully, like this is in the we are talking to the people at the moment, so hopefully, in a year or two, we're going to have way more bronzy samples.
and we will be more than happy to have you back to tell us
Thank you.
about an update. So another question that's related to the actual study design is what samples are actually taken?
Sorry?
How do you get your genetic samples from the squirrels?
Roadkills.
Which may be something to do with the distribution that you're
Yes,
finding as well.
exactly. Because so basically, when you look at the map, so the center, it's more agricultural land. And on the islands, basically, Helen's got this like very nice network. So every people who find, like a dead squirrel, we call her. And obviously, you're more likely to find a red squirrels when you go, close to your home because you're going for a little walk or it's in your garden and so on and so forth. So also, so that not only, like there is agricultural land in the middle, but there is also no people, which does explain why we don't get any samples from there. So yes, the Isle of Wight is mostly roadkills, but on Bronzy Island, it's hair samples. So, like people studying them have been picking some hair and we were just like getting the DNA from there.
So when the squirrels go for a bit of a hairdo, they go to get their hair cut.
Exactly. So, I mean, usually you put, like some sort of like, like tape. And when they go there, they just like, so you get some of the hair.
Yeah. So what other outcomes are you hoping from this study, apart from the level of diversity? Could you, for instance, identify resistance to the pox from the grey squirrels and so enhance likelihood of increasing the population?
I know. I mean, I won't be able to really do that because I think at the moment we don't really know if the squirrels on the island are resistant to the pox, and you just like surely don't want to try that. So we won't be able to study, like pox resistance and all this kind of things, like at the moment where we are. We also know that because because of the low genetic diversity, normally all the immune genes, so all the genes, like which help you fighting against the disease, they also not that diverse, and that, like doesn't help the fight against diseases as well. And we have a colleague who is actually studying that at the moment. So she has some sample from the Isle of Wight, and she's gonna look at immune genes as well. But we're not going to be able to look at resistance against diseases for sure. I think at the moment, really, what we're trying to do is mostly have a clear view about what's happening on the islands, and do we need to do something or not in order to help the populations? Because it might be, I mean, especially on the Isle of Wight, like it might be that the population is big enough to be able to live, like further on without us having to do anything. But it might be that for the, but maybe not. And we need to actually, like sort of like know that in order to see what we can do for conservation.
This one's kind of related to that point that you were just making. Do you think it would help to move a sample of red squirrels from the Isle of Wight to Brownsea to help with the genetic diversity?
So, I mean, it might help with the genetic diversity. The problem is you have different type of like pathogens on both islands. So for example, like you have leprosy on Bronzy Island, which you don't have on the Isle of Wight, and so on and so forth. So, and leprosy is only one of them. So it's really, like it's always a nice idea, but it's really complicated to do because you don't want to bring some diseases from one island to the other island, if it makes sense. So yeah.
So and kind of following on from that one is where do you think the populations on the islands are originating from? do you think there's sort of some sort of relic from when they were widespread across the whole country, or whether or not they're more likely to be introductions from the mainland?
So I think it's kind of like, the problem is like we will never be able to know. So really, it's really speculative. What I think it's actually, you know, like, so if you look, because Bronzy and the Isle of Wight look genetically similar, I think part of it could be, you know, like a remaining population of what used to go, you know, like to be in Dorset. But we also know that for Furzy, we know where the population come from. So Furzy is privately owned, and the people who used to own them, can't remember where it was, if it was in 70s or 80s or something like that. Anyway, they did import some squirrel from Kennoches, so in northern England. And I think this is what explains why we have two signals which are so different from one another. But basically, yes, there is no way for us to know that. We should maybe if we go to all the museum and find, you know, like some old you know, red squirrels from the New Forests, we could yeah.
It's and again, maybe the Darwin project will help with some of that as well, with mapping out the.
No, because I think basically like they kind of like sequencing all the different species.
Okay, so
I'm not sure about how many individual per species there are.
yeah,
It's already, you know, like 70,000 species, so it's kind of like amazing, you know, like what they're doing. So
it's no good if it's only n equals 1 for each species.
it does give you quite a lot of like tools there.
Right, sorry, I'm just sort of going through the questions and trying to group them as we go along. There's quite a lot on the ecology, which we know you're not an ecologist, but
Yes.
you know, we can have a think about it.
Go for it.
One of the main ones is what are the main reasons for population decline of red squirrels in the UK, besides the grey squirrels and the nastiness that they bring?
I mean, this is mostly about the grey squirrels, basically, because every time, you know, like they kind of like together, like we know that the reds, you know, like will disappear. It's also, you know, like in terms of like food competitions, the grey don't need the food to be as ripe as the reds. So basically, by the time it's like nicely ripe, you know, like for the red, the grey have just like take it all on. Obviously, there is, you know, like the problem with the disease and all these kind of things. I mean, same thing, you know, like deforestation is not good as well. Squirrels need their trees. If you don't have tree, you don't have squirrels, and so on and so forth. But I think really the fact that it's so bad in the UK, it's mostly about grey, pardon.
And it kind of comes back as well to how you get your samples. Is
as well, yes,
part
that's a
of it
different thing.
is that, you know, the hazards of little ground for them to actually have as habitat, isn't it?
Yes, no, yeah, exactly. And that's mostly, you know, like on the Isle of Wight, it's
Yeah, there's less space.
well, yes, yeah.
And this kind of links in with one of the questions for is, do you think the eagle repopulation on the Isle of Wight will have an impact on the population?
No, not at all, because I think, you know, like if you look at all the different, so Helen, I mean, she has worked, you know, like a really long time on squirrel, and she basically gave me, you know, like kind of like what the squirrels are dying from, and you know, like sometimes it could be, you know, like cat or dog, or you know, like, but I mean, or disease, you know, whatsoever, but mostly it's roadkill. I think if you can, you know, like sort out the roadkills, you populations will be, you know, like. I mean, we're not sure how much it impacts the population, but you know, like the first, they die mostly from roadkills on the Isle of Wight.
Well, I don't think it's just on the Isle of Wight either, because I've got friends that live somewhere where they're trying to sort of encourage the red squirrel population, but quite often they're finding them dead in the road as well, that they're not very good at crossing the road. I think
No,
maybe if we introduce an education program to help them cross the road.
exactly. We need to make some little bridges or something.
Yeah, well, that's actually the farm where my friends live. That's actually what they've done. Is
Yeah.
they've built a bridge across one of the roads, because obviously it's sort of farmland, but yeah, they've been able to do that.
Yeah.
So it kind of comes in as well as how much effect do you think increasing pine marten populations would have in particularly controlling the greys?
I think this is, I mean, it does show that there is quite a lot of like people who say that obviously when you have pine marten, you will decrease quite a lot the population of like gray squirrel. So that's actually, you know, like really good. The problem is, look at Bournemouth, for example, like the population of gray squirrel is really high. And we know that pine marten, we know will never go near close to humans. So, you know, like that will work in more sort of like forest area, but that will not sort of like work everywhere. So if you wanted to do that, we really need to, you know, like really nicely decrease the populations of gray squirrels. And I think at the moment, you know, like I don't think we kind of like sure that gray and red can live together just because of the virus as well. So that will definitely help for sure. But I think that is not the ultimate answer.
And I think probably what we could end up with, isn't it, is that we've got grey in more urban areas, a bit like some of the pigeon populations.
Yeah.
The greys are in the urban areas, and the reds hopefully get more of a chance in some of the more rural areas.
Yeah, true. Yeah, maybe.
We can hope. And another interesting one as well from Peter is Isle of Wight samples affected by the type of tree populations across the island? So again, that again fits in with the agriculture, doesn't it? And
I think this mostly they need trees to be able to, you know, like to go from one part to the other. And I think, and I know, and I mean the main issue at the moment. So like, so again, Helen is doing that work. She's actually mapping all the different trees she could find, you know, like on the island, because obviously for the squirrel, you might just need a little corridor, so you know, like 2 or 3 trees, which you will never be able to see, you know, like through Google Map. It's just going to the garden and see, you know, like where are those trees, and they're also planting, you know, like quite a lot of like trees at the moment, in order to, you know, like do corridors and help the squirrels. Yeah.
Okay, there's one from Adam is, although increased genetic diversity is good, are there any populations that are too genetically different to mix or introduce?
Pardon, can you say it again?
Although increased genetic diversity is good, are there any populations that are too genetically different to mix?
Okay, so I think that's a very good question. It's kind of like, so I mean, basically, before, if we wanted to sort of like introduce squirrels, and again, this is not that easy because of pathogens and things like that. But also, what we always need to think of is squirrels, or every, you know, animal population, they kind of like adapted to their own surroundings. So, you know, the squirrels on the Isle of Wight are adapted to the environmental conditions to the Isle of Wight, for example. So let's say if we wanted to introduce, you know, like squirrels from Spain, you know, the squirrels from Spain might be, you know, like nicely genetically diverse, but they might not have the adaptations to survive on the Isle of Wight. Does that make sense? Yeah, so basically this is kind of like it. So when you want to reintroduce, it's not, I mean, you need to reintroduce, you know, like from a population which is genetically diverse, and, you know, because otherwise, you know, it's a lot of like money for nothing. But you also need to make sure that the population you're introducing can adapt to these new environmental conditions, because otherwise that does not work.
I think that's part of the problem as well, isn't it? Because they are such an isolated population, being on islands, it does mean that they're very adapted to the conditions on the islands, as opposed to anything coming in and out. So, yeah.
Yeah. it will be. I mean, basically, these things would need to be studied, you know. And there is a yeah,
So there's plenty of
there is
of
always
scope
plenty
there
of
for
like room for
future
study. Yeah.
studies. An interesting follow-on from that is, what are the hoped for practical benefits from this work now and in the future?
Practical benefits in terms of like for the squirrels, or
Well, for the squirrels, for
I think basically, I mean, you know, like if we think about more, like guess economically, like if you think about the Isle of Wight, they're really famous for the red squirrels. So quite a lot of like tourists are actually coming, you know, like for red squirrels. So the fact that you can serve, you know, like those species does break, you know, like have some kind of like economical value, so to say. And basically, you know, like some more practically, what we're gonna do is once we know exactly what is the problem for the squirrels, I mean, especially on the Isle of Wight, you can actually plant trees. And I know Helen is also doing that at the moment. So, you know, like the more we're gonna know, the more sort of like, you know, like the more answer we're gonna have, so we can actually plant trees. If we find that, you know, like, okay, we need to introduce from something else, which we probably won't need to do, we can actually know, okay, you know, like which other populations can we come in, and so on and so forth. So yeah, so this is where all the practicality is going to come. I guess it's a little bit more further down the line that we are at the moment, I guess.
But I think it's an exciting opportunity to get an idea of what's going on in these populations, and the dynamics of the populations, isn't it?
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah.
Especially because they are so isolated populations.
Mm.
There's a question round about, could you extract DNA from stuffed squirrels held in museums to be able to provide you more DNA?
Yes, the answer is yes. Normally, you can do it. So we have not done it, you know, like sort of like at the moment, but there is quite a lot of like techniques for you to be able to do it. The main issue, you know, like sometimes in the squirrels, in the museum, is how they preserve the specimen. So if your specimen is frozen or dry, you get, you know, like much more DNA. But people used to put them in formaldehyde, which is beautiful to, you know, like conserve the tissue. So if we want to make histology, it's like amazing. If you want to look at DNA, this is terrible because it destroyed the entire DNA. But there is like, I mean, there is more and more people coming with methods to be able to actually DNA extract, you know, like those samples as well. So yeah.
It just depends on how good the labeling is of where they actually found the
Yes,
the
that
squirrel
as
as
well.
Yeah, is anybody else got any other questions? I think that we've pretty much covered the main themes. Apart from, do you think grey squirrels are better at crossing the road?
Actually, I don't think so, because I think quite a lot of like grey still, you know, like die. It's just probably we don't, you know, think about them too much.
Yeah. There's a question of, and recognizing that you're not an ecologist, do you know if reds enter buildings like greys do?
Okay, I mean, I don't. Okay, so that's gonna be my personal opinions, but you know, like for all the red squirrels I've seen when I was in France or in Germany, they're never close to you, you know, like you always see them in the trees, you know, like far away. This is why, you know, like people, or you know, like even myself, when I went to the UK, I find gray squirrels, you know, like so amazing because they come, you know, like so close to you. I mean, a red will never do that. He will just, I mean, you know, like you just see them from like far off the tree. They don't come any close to you. So, you know, they might, you know, like come to the building, but I don't think so. I think that will not be there.
Well, I can jump in there with that as well. So again, the farm where my friends are living, the person who's setting up the conservation area for the red squirrels, they've set up some photographic hides round about the farm, particularly to do with things like photographing red squirrels, and they've also got red kites that breed there as well, and all sorts. But actually, with some of the hides that they've put in some of the forest areas, the reds are actually coming in and pinching some of the nuts that are in the hides that people are sort of putting out. So they're actually coming in when photographers are in there. So I think it probably depends on the situation. Also, my friend that lives in the Highlands, they've been able to put stuff out for some of the reds, and they're coming into like a feeding area within their garden, so quite close to the house. But I think it probably depends on how hungry they are and how cheeky their personality is as well.
Well, I mean, it's kind of like, obviously, like, this is something on the Isle of Wight. Quite a lot of like people do feed the squirrels.
Yeah.
Which is something, you know, like, I mean, I never saw it in Germany or in France, for example. We just like let the squirrels wear. But actually, yeah, I guess if there is some food, they have, you know, some incentive to come closer.
So we've got a sorry for the complicated question. So are you ready?
Yes.
If you could compare the DNA of a living squirrel on the Isle of Wight to one from the same location hundreds or thousands of years ago, would it be more or less genetically different than if you compared it to a squirrel that's currently alive but lives in a geographically different population?
Okay, so that's a very interesting questions.
It is
Okay,
indeed,
let
isn't
me
it?
see.
That sounds like an exam question.
So it's actually time versus, you know, like geographical locations. Okay, I mean, there is, you know, like, it's really difficult to sort of like answer that question. I think the main thing is about what are the conditions, you know, like which kind of, so, I mean, species, I mean, as humans, as everything, we kind of like adapt to our own environmental conditions as well. So, I mean, instead of like over time, we can think they should be, you know, like closely genetically the same. You know, if you take squirrels, you know, like from 1,000 years ago to actually now, but it also depends about, you know, like how the environmental condition kind of like change. But it's also, you know, like, do we had any introductions of squirrels on the islands? And I know that when I started to work on the island, some people were telling me that Prince Albert, which I didn't know he was at the time, but now I know, it's Victoria's husband, did brought, you know, like some squirrels from Germany on the Isle of Wight. The funny thing about that, it's kind of like a legend, because we looked into that, and there is actually no document, you know, like saying this, or we didn't find, you know, like anything within the data that we have. But basically, yes. So I would expect population from the same sites to be more genetically related than, you know, like two different geographical sites. But obviously there is, you know, like adaptations coming on, and there is also introduction, especially in thousands of years, if it makes sense.
And it does.
Good.
And I think, are there any more questions? Because I think that is probably, if there aren't any more sort of questions that are waiting in the wings, then I think that's maybe a very good place to stop. Because it kind of brings us back full circle, doesn't it? About the differences between your different genetic populations and the different islands.
Yeah.
So unless anybody's got something that they're dying to ask, which I'll give you another second or two, quickly type. At least it means it's not going to be too long a question. But if nobody else has got any more questions, I think all the other ones have been covered within some of the other questions that we've asked along the themes. But I think all that remains is to say thank you very much for a very interesting talk, and for helping us reappreciate those little red devils. And yeah, thank you to everybody that's come along and attended our event this evening. Thank you very much. and hopefully we'll see you all sometime soon. Keep your eyes open for our next event, and yeah, hopefully we'll be able to share some exciting research with you sometime soon. In fact, we know when it'll be next month. So take care, everyone, and thank you very much for coming along.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you.